Thank you for being my guest,
You're welcome.
Mr.
Fields,
Fields,
Gow Fields.
Mayor, former Mayor of Lakeland. Thank you, Cohats, for letting me sponsor this. Like I said, I met Ashley, and he said he worked for you for a number of years, and
Right.
I'm not a big political guy, but I am aware of situations that go on, and he said perhaps you're an approachable guy, and I said,
Okay.
well, I would love to approach. So, can I ask you to give me just a basic information, what people may or may not know about you, including myself?
Okay, well, I was born and raised here in Lakeland. My mother, her family moved here before she was born, so she was born and raised here in Lakeland as well. My father was a transplant here from a very small town in South Alabama called Sunflower. Yeah, about 45 miles north of Mobile. He came here in 1955. He had 2 job offers as a school teacher after he graduated from Tuskegee. And one was up north in Minnesota, and the other was in this place called Lakeland, Florida, that he'd never heard of before, but it was further south than where he was raised, so he wasn't going to any snow.
That's snow.
And when he began teaching here, he taught for a couple of years, and then he was drafted into the Army, even though they rejected him due to physical when he graduated from college. But 2 years later, they needed him, so it didn't matter. And after he got out, my mother had graduated from college by the end in Florida A&M University's nursing program, and so their dentist introduced them to each other.
Oh, wow.
Yeah. And even because he was teaching where she had graduated from high school, but she graduated before he got the teaching job, and so they met after she was back here and working. I'm the oldest of 3. Went to Lakeland Christian K through 5, and then was at it was Lime Street Elementary then. I don't always remember the new name of that particular elementary school now, but it was named in honor of someone. I'm drawing a blank on the name of it now. Then I went to Seth McKeel. It was junior high school then, before it became a charter school, so it was a long time ago. And then Kathleen High School, Polk State College for a couple of years, and graduated from there, and then went to University of South Florida, and then started working for Juice Bowl Products. Juice Bowl Products is out on Bartow Road. It's gone through a number of name changes over the years, but back then it was owned by Campbell Soup.
Oh, okay.
And so it was one of Campbell Soup's subsidiaries and plant locations. And so I was part of the Campbell family for a few years before. And then I started working on my MBA, and did that while I was working from Nova Southeastern, where I was able to complete that degree. And then I began working in the insurance industry and Allstate Insurance Management Training Program. And after going through the training rotation, I opted out of it to become an agent, and was in an agency partnership in North Lakeland for a few years, and then separated my office and moved downtown. It was during the time that downtown was starting, its revitalization was starting to pick up, and my community involvement at that time gave me a pretty good idea of what was going to happen and when, and so it was a good time to move downtown. After being in the business for a little while, and through my volunteerism and other candidates' campaigns, both at the local, state, and federal level, that was my introduction to politics and advocacy for improvement in the community. There was a resignation that took place on the city commission. Reverend Willie Williams, he was a pastor full-time and taught, was a school teacher, guidance counselor at Kathleen High School, and he was also on the city commission. And so he was resigning from his seat on the commission to take the pastorship of a larger church in Tampa. And so that vacancy, he timed it so that the city wouldn't have to conduct a special election, but the remaining commission would appoint his replacement. And so I was appointed initially to to finish out his term, his uncompleted term. So that's how I actually got started serving in an elected office. It was by appointment, then I had to run for re-election after that. After about, I think it was 17 years as a commissioner, I resigned to run for mayor. And that was in 2009 election, but sworn in 2010 and served a term as mayor. All during that time, I maintained my insurance business. During the time I became mayor, I left being an all-state exclusive agent under their contract and became an independent agent. So that gives you a little bit of,
That's fantastic.
yeah, a little bit of history on
When
it.
you were in school, if you don't mind, did you ever think about politics, or when did the political bug bite you? When you started with Allstate?
No, I always understood the importance of economics and politics on improving the lives of people down at the community level, no matter where they live. Just understanding that, understanding how to engage those leaders who were in positions and operating levels of, levers of power, if you will, was important to be able to articulate to them concerns that you had and making sure that their plans included the needs that you saw that existed too. And what I learned through that is that there were a lot of elected officials who were starved for a better understanding of the diverse nature of the communities they represented. Everyone has their own life experiences, and they know those experiences real well, but that doesn't translate into understanding everyone else's life experiences in the various walks of life that you'll end up representing in public office. And so I saw that there were people who wanted to hear from folks who could communicate with them and be able to articulate what needed to happen or needed to change. During the time that I came along, of course, a lot of the things that we were dealing with as a country related to segregation, beginning to break down some of those barriers. A lot of the discriminatory things that took place in decades prior led to a lot of neighborhoods and communities that suffered through disinvestment. And if you were going to correct that, there needed to be, it wasn't going to be fixed overnight. It didn't get that way overnight, but there also needed to be a coming together of people who were willing to go through the steps of making incremental improvements and doing so in a thoughtful manner that engaged the entire community and didn't have people feeling that they were being pitted one against the other. And so that was my take on what needed to happen, and thank God that in spite of what my parents experienced in their young lives and in the time period that they were raised, they their love of the Lord and teaching the importance of identifying people of like mind regardless of background, race, or what their beliefs were, could help us to build a better place for everyone if you took that approach.
I agree 100%. On the other side of the issue is when you're not discriminated, you're born into non-discrimination, but you're raised in a discriminatory family, you have to unlearn what you were taught.
Right.
And I went through that. I said, this ain't right.
Right.
I'm a person, someone else is a person. I unlearned, it took a long time.
Right.
And I'm not perfect, but
Right.
I unlearned, I think, some of the things that you described.
Right.
And I am all about being as equal. I don't care. You're human, you're a person of God.
Right.
You deserve the opportunity. If you got the drive, the will, you deserve the same opportunity that everyone else has.
Right.
So I can appreciate the work that your mom and dad, to the best of my ability,
Right.
the position that they were, and then you were able to see it and move on with it. That's fantastic. And describing some of the things, if you don't mind, what are some of the biggest issues that you did see solved when you were a commissioner and or mayor that you're proud of?
Yeah. What I described as disinvestment in certain areas, was troubling to see everyone paying their taxes, but the reinvestment of those taxes were not being done in a fair and judicious manner. And that's part of what you had to slowly begin to redirect decisions around to make sure there were some things that had literally been promised to the community. And then the promise would continue to be put off. It would just never make its way into the budget. And that was one of my big introductions to some of the local political issues here. What stands as the Larry Jackson Branch Library today, for decades, there had been a promise to Northwest Lakeland, the construction of a physical library. And what was given to them was what was called a reading room that was located in the Coleman Bush building. And that promise that had gone unfulfilled, along with a number of others, on physical improvements in areas where slum and blight existed. That was the governmental term that I learned about it, because there was legislation created around how you eliminate slum and blight. Today, we see community redevelopment areas, or CRAs, that get talked about, but at its foundation, those areas were created to eliminate slum and blight from disinvestment and discriminatory budgeting practices of the past. People who are relatively new to the community have no idea that just like downtown was disinvested in, and it was a place that, Munn Park was populated by the homeless.
I remember when I first moved, I moved here in '03, and I remember the emptiness on the building. Oh, I remember.
Yeah, and it was even worse if you go back into the 90s and 80s. I know when I relocated my office downtown in August of '91, on the block that I was on, I was the third business to actually be located in what was actually a 4-block area there. All of the buildings were empty, and it was dominated by the homeless having a place to sleep at night, and some of the things that went along with that. Well, just like there was disinvestment in downtown, and people, and that was not so much because the government neglected it, it was because there wasn't an emphasis on incentivizing the private sector to invest in being in downtown. It was a central business district and not where people live. You had people who came in and worked during the day and they went home and it was just empty, when you got to past dark, and so it took on a different life at that time. Well, we had different pockets of disinvestment that took place in residential areas, because we lived in segregated communities, and when you saw the public infrastructure not being taken care of, that was not going to encourage people of means to buy there. But if the public infrastructure was taken care of, you could encourage people with private sector dollars to make some investments that could in fact take place. But the public investment had to take place first. That's exactly what happened with downtown. The streetscape that we take for granted that exists today was having to be done one block at a time. And in those blocks where people knew it was going to take place, you could encourage someone to buy and renovate an empty building and invest in it. And so seeing how you do that in a commercial district as in a residential district, and what you can do to revitalize and bring things back, it helps a city to do a better job of being the best that it can be for everyone, in spite of whatever may have been done wrong in the past. That's one of the things you have to deal with if you got a new community, because if you go to a new community in Florida that didn't experience all those things, you don't see that. But if you go to a community that is an older community that was maybe founded in the 1800s, it was very easy to find these areas that went through those periods of time, and they have to be planned for differently than a brand new community. Because you can plan like when Celebration came along right outside of Disney, it was easy to plan differently for a brand new community that did not go through what some of the older communities in Florida went through in years past. And
it's an uphill battle.
Yeah, but it can be done if you work together. Now, if people believe, well, we got to fight against each other, it becomes more difficult, and you have to have leaders that encourage people to work together.
That takes character. I have very minimal experience, and in fact, I was in the military. I was in the Army. I enlisted for 2 years in the Army, and I got my taste of politics. And I did my 2 years, and they asked me if I wanted to re-enlist, and I said no.
Yeah.
And I was gone. Yeah, me and politics, it takes character, man. So in your tenure, I know that they renamed the bus parking for you. So you're a big advocate for the foundation of transportation. Nothing's going to get done if everybody stays in the same place. It seems like.
Right.
And if you put in the foundation of public transportation and people being able to get out in order, then they can start building upon that. And so, as I understand, your legacy was, I know you were part of the train going up to Orlando that didn't work out.
High speed.
So
train.
anything with transportation is your.
Yeah, it is, transportation resources and assets are an important part of economic development. Publix could not be very successful if there was no road that they could put the trucks on to get goods delivered to the warehouses and then taken from the warehouses to the stores. And they don't pay for the roads, the taxpayers do. Same thing with airports and seaports. The airlines didn't pay for the airport to open it up. It took the investment of the government as well as with the seaports. Yes, you can charge them user fees to be using it to help maintain and operate it, but the initial investment has to come from the government, which is us, the taxpayers, on being able to put it in place. And if you do it right, then you can build an economy that's second to none in the world. I mean, just think where this country would be if President Eisenhower had not envisioned having an interstate system. Well, you gotta start somewhere. I remember as a child, because my dad we would make 2 trips a year to his home in Alabama. Interstate 10 wasn't there as a child. It was 1998 and 27 that you had to take until you got to the segment of Interstate 10 that existed, which was in Defuniak Springs up in the Panhandle at the time. Because it had not made it to Tallahassee yet, or all the way across. And so just seeing that and my father helping me to understand, well, they got to do it in segments as they can afford it. Well, that improved the ability of the country to be able to move people for individual family trips, but also to move goods and services on the same, piece of, they call it infrastructure, but it is really an economic development resource. When you think about it, it not only helps with the quality of life of us as individuals when we want to take a trip somewhere, but it also helps when we want to order something and we get it delivered next day, is that they have the ability to actually land the plane nearby, get it off the plane, and get it onto the truck that brings it to your door.
I take every single bit of that for granted. Every single bit of it. Isn't that a shame? I admit it. I admit it.
And then once it's in place, I remind people, potholes are not Democrat or Republican. They're not blue or red, but they will tear up your car if you don't take care of the road. And so once those resources are in place, they have to be maintained. And if you don't fill the pothole, it will get bigger.
Yeah.
It will get deeper.
That's right. And people will ignore it. I seen on social media the other day, so I think it's up in Canada, they got these potholes and they've been asking and asking. So somebody freaking took a tree and they put the tree and they filled it with dirt and they got this tree in the middle of the street growing. It's a pothole, right? So they put a potted plant in there and it's growing.
Right.
So it got attention. I think it got filled too. You put a tree in the middle of that hole and it's gonna get attention. So people pull up and say, what the heck is this,
Right.
So I do.
Right.
And I think it's getting worse. I don't think it's getting better. I think the new generation takes even more for granted.
And that's because we haven't done a good enough job of making sure they understand, how did we get here? We often hear people talk about the World War II generation being the greatest generation. Well, that was because they understood how they got to where they were and what it was going to take to make things better for the next generation. We don't have that same level of understanding. And we can't blame the school system that they're responsible for doing it. These are things that need to be done at the community level. Yes, there will be some families that will do a good job of it. I know I was blessed to have that in my family. But every family doesn't get that, and that doesn't mean that the community still can't do it. And so that's part of what is missing and what makes it easy to take things for granted. When I got appointed to the city commission, on the transit system, I didn't know that the city commission along with the county commission, created the Lakeland Area Mass Transit District that operates as a Citrus Connection. I didn't know that Reverend Williams was one of the three city commissioners, along with 2 county commissioners that served on that board. So when I went to my first city commission meeting, then I was told, oh, by the way, these are your committee assignments, and you're also on the transit district board. And so I began serving on there, and the transit district went through a very difficult time of audits from the federal agencies that audit public transit systems, because they're investors in it. Both the federal government and the state government put resources into local transportation systems like the transit district. And I ended up serving 12 consecutive years as the board chair to help lead us through all of that. And the naming of the terminal, the park and ride location after me, was a thank you from the transit district for all those years of getting them through some very difficult times and doing what Tom Phillips credits me. He wasn't here at the time, but from what he learned from the staff, they credited me with saving the district from what could have very well have been the closure of it, based on what some of the federal regulators wanted to do at that time.
Wow.
So that was a thank you.
That's awesome.
To have it named after me.
I can only imagine that how proud I would be if I did something like that. That'd be awesome. That's something to really appreciate. And probably not done.
No, it's not done.
No, I'm talking about your work.
Oh, no, my work is not done. I believe in continue to look for ways to make improvements in the community, where you live, because it has an impact on those around you, and even on, even in your business as a business owner, but also what you hand down to the next generation. Because you got to encourage them. This is not something you do for a little bit of time and then quit. This is something we need to encourage people to continue to add to. It's no different than building the church. It's not something you go do for a year or two and then you quit. It's a commitment in serving the Lord and serving the community that, where you're located, because that's what He's asked us to do.
That's absolutely. Yeah, I love comparing God's rules and laws and common sense with man's rules and laws and no common sense. I love comparing. Why would you do this when the common sense tells you to do this? Why would you go and do this?
Right.
I love, in my head, I have this God's rules and man's rules.
Right.
And so I think it helps me make more objective decisions,
Right.
So, what is in the future for you, sir? What issues are at the top of your list that my little bitty audience who might watch this, we can bring attention to?
Well, right now, we still need to do a better job of building what I call bridges of understanding across the various sectors of Lakeland. Lakeland in its past has been a very siloed community. There's a lot of silos of individuals and organizations that do good work that don't necessarily know about one another or collaborate with one another. We've gotten better than where it used to be, but there's still room for improvement, because that is one of the ways that we can help people to feel included in the community and feel like what they're doing makes a difference, not just on what they see, but even on lives of people that they hadn't met, but people may have been impacted by the work that they're doing in some manner. And that's something that we can continue to get better at. Looking ahead, I've decided to throw my hat in the ring to run for another public office. Marsha Fox is not gonna return to office, as she decided not to seek re-election in November of 24. And so there's some conversation that she and I had last year, and I'm going to be pursuing running for Polk County Property Appraiser to follow her in that office. It's going to be an interesting run and be a little bit different from what I've done in the past, but it's also going to help me to utilize a lot of experiences I've had both in my insurance business and helping people to understand the resources that are available to the property appraiser's office, and then all my time in public office on being reliant upon the finished product of what the property appraiser's office does, and helping governmental bodies do their planning that impacts the people and the businesses that they serve in their respective roles. So I'm excited about that and looking forward to it.
Well, I appreciate you sharing that. Like I said, I take politics for granted. I take, and the silo. I noticed that I have this presumption that everybody knows everybody, and I'm the new guy in town.
Okay.
I decided I retired in 2017 and I had nothing to do. And then COVID come along, and then I just started I'll make a directory of Lakeland, like the old phone book. So I made Lake, and then going out and, knocking on doors. For some reason, I just assumed everybody knew everybody. And I come to find out hardly nobody knows anybody. So I know that these silos exist.
Right.
And I'm trying to build my network of knowing people, and it's every time I turn around, somebody new. And then my wife asked me the other day, she said, how many people do you know in Lakeland? How many people? Tell me. I thought about it, it's like, maybe 100, maybe 150 at the most.
Okay.
And then she said, how many people live in Lakeland? And I said, 120,000. And that opened my eyes, okay?
Right.
It clicked. I was like, oh my, I could live 5 lifetimes and not know everybody.
Right.
So it's just world of opportunity to meet people and help our community grow
Right.
as much.
And keep this in mind, Lakeland, the city limits, has over 100,000 residents in it, but those individuals with a Lakeland address is closer to 285,000.
Are you serious? I didn't know that.
Yep. Now, most of them are Lakeland Electric customers because Lakeland Electric service territory is well beyond the city limits. Before the Citrus Connection started providing service, working with the county on a countywide basis, its service territory was much larger than the footprint of the city limits of Lakeland. So yes, there are a lot of people who have a Lakeland address, far more than what actually live in the city limits.
I did
of
not
Lakeland.
know that.
Yeah.
Thank you for sharing that. Oh, that just doubled my work.
Yeah, and then keep this in mind too, within a 100-mile radius of where you sit here in downtown Lakeland, there are nearly 9.5 million people. That makes it the 7th largest of such super regions in the country.
9 million. And I thought 120 people was a lot. I thought I knew 120 people. I know 120 people, man. Oh, that is eye-opening as well.
Yeah, sitting between Orlando and Tampa in the middle of the I-4 corridor puts you in that closer proximity to people. And when you get to national politics and they talk about Central Florida, the diversity of it represents the diversity of the country. And so that's why on the national level, they're always interested in what's going on in the minds of people in Central Florida, because it's a similar mix of what you see across the country's footprint.
Yeah, that's awesome. When I started the Lakeland website, I said, you know what, if this works, maybe Polk County, maybe Florida.
Mm-hmm.
So I literally bought Polk County, I bought all the cities in the state of Florida. I went on, it's like, oh, maybe I'll get an audience, you never know. But it's a lot of fun meeting people, it really is, I enjoy it. That reminds me, you said Lakeland Electric. I was terrified and still a little bit scared about Lakeland Electric falling into someone else's hands.
Okay.
Can I ask you, is Publix for Lakeland remaining the way it is, or is Publix for going to someone else, some investor? I don't know that answer.
Yeah, I wouldn't say Publix is for one or the other. What Publix is interested in is making sure that they have good value in the service from Lakeland Electric and have good rates for that. I know, years ago, the last time there was an effort to look at changing the charter to make it easier to sell Lakeland Electric, that became one of the things that people heard through the rumor mill and the grapevine. But what Publix wants here is the same thing they want in Georgia. They're not looking necessarily to change how the electric companies provide them their services. They want to make sure that they're getting the best rates that they possibly can. And when you're a manufacturer and you run operations around the clock, those are, those entities that use a certain base load of electricity on a 24-hour basis, they actually contribute to lower rates for those that are residential users and business users that have a certain time that they're peak use. For residential, our peak use is when we're home, when we get back home from work. And it goes down during the day when we go to work. Well, in the business community, when people go to work, if they're not working from home, that use goes up during the day, and then at night it goes down. But the large turbines that generate electricity, they run more efficiently if they run continuously. They're not designed to stop and start. And that's when your costs go up, the cost to repair and maintain them go up. And so you need to reward those large users that are running a steady load with a rate because of what they contribute to keeping everybody else's rates low. And that's what Publix is interested in more than anything. How easy is it to sell Lakeland Electric? Well, in order to sell Lakeland Electric, 2/3 of all of the electors, that's the way it states it in the charter, would have to vote to sell the utility in whole or in part. And what that means is, if there are 60,000 registered voters in Lakeland, 2/3 of the registered voters have to vote to do that, not 2/3 that show up to vote. Okay, we can't get a 2/3 turnout, so it is literally a poison pill to make it absolutely, nearly impossible to sell Lakeland Electric.
Thank you for sharing that.
Yeah, so, and, there have been entities in the past that were interested. TECO was interested in buying Lakeland Electric during my time as mayor, and they really weren't in a financial position to do it. Their financial rating was weaker than ours was at that time, and so for them to borrow the money to be able to make such a purchase would have made it unaffordable, and that would have ended up being a surcharge on the Lakeland ratepayers to be able to finance such a deal. But they had been harmed by contracts that they were in with a company called Enron that was based in Texas, and they were harmed by the Enron collapse that took place. And they went through successive quarters of nearly $1 billion in losses in the aftermath of Enron's collapse, so it took them a while to recover from that. But TECO was purchased by a Canadian utility company called Emera. And Emera's representatives met with me before I was mayor, when I was the chair of the finance committee, to talk about the purchase of Lakeland Electric. And they wanted to be sure what our charter said and what it actually meant. And Mayor Fletcher at the time asked if I would meet with them, since I was the chair of the finance committee, to explain also what it would take to diffuse the bonds that we had if they were to pursue going through such a purchase. And there have been other companies that have looked at it at the time because of our strategic location, because of who we have as some of our customers, like Publix. Everybody would love to have Publix in their customer base that's in the utility business. And some of the other customers that we have here.
Saddle Creek.
Well, Matheson Tri-Gas is one that they would be really interested in having, because they have a small footprint, but they use a lot of electricity to produce the gases that they sell in the food and the healthcare industry. And they have a large base load that they, of electricity that they use as well. And so we have other users on our system and our customer footprint that are very attractive to the utilities around us.
That's thank you for sharing that. What about the idea? I mean, you say it's a poison pill to not even get 2/3 of the registered voters, but what about rural people? I think didn't they try to change the rules? Didn't they try to put on the ballot that not 2/3 of the registered voters, but let's try to change the rules of the game so that in the future we can get a hold of Lakeland Electric? These private equity firms who come in and pay to change the rules.
There have been different efforts over time to look at lowering that 2/3 of the electoral's requirement. But one of the things that I've had the chance of experiencing firsthand, there are two things that Lakeland voters are turned off by. Number one on that list is the sale of Lakeland Electric, or the effort to make it easier to sell Lakeland Electric. That's number one on the list. Number two on the list is changing our form of governance from what is called a weak mayor form of government to a strong mayor form of government. For some reason, the voters aren't really interested in doing that either, and both of those have been tried over time. There was an effort after I was out of office as mayor that it actually was put on the ballot on changing the governance, and it was beat down pretty resoundingly by the voters as far as rejecting it. But those are two things that I've heard from people over the years that are just non-starters. And different people have and they don't all have the same reason for it. But one of the things that was an interesting experience for me during my time as mayor, when we went to visit the rating agencies up in New York that put their financial rating, AM Best, Standard & Poor's, and it's important, the stronger rating that you have financially, the lower interest rates that you can borrow money in the bond markets for. So it is a savings to the taxpayers to be able to maintain a strong financial rating. Well, one of the representatives there was telling us that it's a common conversation all over the country of people being asked to sell their public utility. And he says, and people are not interested in it they're not interested in big government and big business getting together to take away a resource that the taxpayers own. And that's how in all these communities across America, where there is a public utility, most people, they like knowing I can say something to the board of directors of my utility. I can have, an impact. Well, who can go sit in the boardroom of these large private utilities? You can't. And you don't have the same impact. And when people know that I own it and I can actually have my voice heard, I may not get everything I want, but I can at least be heard. They don't want to lose what they own, and they don't want to lose the ability to be able to influence what's going on. And that's the strength of public power. And public power in its beginning got started because the bigger communities attracted the investment from the private sector to have have electricity rather, and have a utility to provide it. And so when, Tampa was much bigger than Lakeland, Orlando didn't exist at the time when electricity was founded and it was beginning to be provided. And that's what was happening. The larger communities got it, and the smaller communities or the rural areas had to decide, if we want to have this valuable resource in our community, we're going to have to come together and do it ourselves, because we're not big enough to attract private investment. And so that was how public power even came into being. And if you run it correctly, it will always be worth more to you than what someone else is willing to pay you for it.
Yeah, that's reassuring. That is very reassuring, because I'm a Lakeland resident, 20 years, and that is my number one.
Yeah. And Lakeland Electric was sold at one time. Back in the early 1900s, it was sold, and the public was not happy about it, and some things that began to take place. So the commission went back to reacquire it and bring it back under public ownership. And then over a series of changes over the years to the charter, they kept making it harder and harder to ever do that again.
I love hearing that. Thank you for sharing that. Yeah, I'm gonna be able to sleep tonight. Yeah, because I didn't. It's not a big issue, but I think that's the secret to Lakeland. I think that's if someone's able to come in here and say, okay, Publix, here's our contract. You're gonna save a whole bunch of money if you let this sale go through, and then that's their incentive, and they let it happen or whatever. That was my biggest.
Yeah. Well, Publix is much more sophisticated than that for somebody to tell them.
Oh, it's one of the best. I tried. I interviewed with Publix twice in my life. I was a maintenance person, and I tried twice, and I wasn't the right one. And if you see some of my stuff, it might be the colors might match, or you never know. I still love Publix. I'd love for them to hire me, and I'd own some stock. I'd love to have some of that Publix stock. Man. I would love to.
Yeah.
Well, sir, I appreciate your time very much, and a lot of our information aligns. And is there anything I can do for you in the future? Please, I would love to learn more about running for public office.
Okay.
The property appraiser. I'd love to see what I can do and pick I really like Ashley. He's a good guy. Thank Ashley for inviting, for letting me know.
Okay. All right, well, thank you very much for having me.
Thank you very
Yeah.
much, sir.
All right.
God bless you.
God bless you too.